This is Day 41 Disaster Relief bringing you an update on April 12th, 2025. I'm sitting here in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, just grateful for God's blessing, helping me to help my family, helping us in the work He's called us to do, and was taking some time to go over this 107-page tropical cyclone report that was released by the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Center back on March 19th. This report came out, and this was a few days before we were leaving to go down to Western North Carolina. So we didn't have a whole lot of time to look into this, but I had some time yesterday to read through it and wanted to share some key points from this report. While there is no report, whether 20 pages or 100 pages, while there's no video or documentary that can really explain everything that occurred last year on September 27th, this report, I think, helps explain why Hurricane Helene was so unusually devastating to Western North Carolina and other areas of the Southern Appalachians. So I will get into some of these key points that I was able to take from this report. First off, this came up the Gulf side, and it hit the coast of Florida and the Big Bend region of Florida, which is the eastern side of the Panhandle. It was a Category 4 when it landed, and was in the 90th percentile of size compared to other hurricanes of similar intensity. So there's how big the hurricane is, but there's how intense it is. It could be big and not do a lot of damage. It could be small and do a lot of damage, or it could be both, right? This was big and intense, obviously. And when it made landfall, it was the strongest storm to hit the Florida Big Bend area in recorded history, and that dates back to 1900. It was fast moving directionally, so the direction that it moves, either across the ocean or over land, is one factor. There's also the cyclone speed, that rotational force that it has. So we're talking straight line direction, or moving, not spinning. It was fast, so it hit Florida and it moved north across Georgia at a very fast speed. And it did damage in both of those areas. It had a very large footprint of what it affected, but it got to North Carolina and the southern Blue Ridge Mountains and South Carolina and that part of eastern Tennessee very quickly. And as a result, it did not downgrade in intensity the way storms usually do as they move inland. So that was one factor that was unique about this storm. It hit those mountains and it pivoted to the northwest up towards Kentucky at that point, and it slowed in directional speed, but the eastern side of that, rotational, it spun up really fast, and those winds went right over Western North Carolina to the point where there were wind gusts of up to 105 miles per hour in Mount Mitchell, which is in Yancey County, North Carolina. So by the time when it made landfall as a Category 4, and they quickly downgrade 321, no longer a hurricane. They call it a tropical storm at that point. It had been downgraded to a tropical storm after it hit, or by the time it hit Western North Carolina. But I do want to call out that 105 miles per hour wind gusts are consistent still with a Category 2 hurricane. So the winds were still very deadly by the time of hitting that part of the country. And with the winds, of course, came enormous amounts of rainfall. Rainfall totals ranged from 20 to 30 inches between September 25th and the 28th. So the storm struck on the 27th, but there was rain leading up to it. And I'll talk about that in a minute here, because that's also a factor. But in Yancey County, again, going back to where those high wind gusts were recorded, North Carolina and Yancey County, it received twice as much rainfall as Florida did when the hurricane moved over Florida. So the wind speeds and the rain, they were as intense or even more intense in terms of the rain by the time it got to North Carolina. So that was harder hit. And when I say Western North Carolina, obviously parts of Western Virginia, Eastern Tennessee, northern South Carolina, they can also be factored into this region. Western North Carolina sort of at the center of it, but other parts nearby were also equally devastated in certain areas. So that is something to note, but twice as much rainfall in that part of western North Carolina as Florida received on the coast. The National Water Center, not the Weather Center, but the Water Center, analyzed these totals, and they concluded that for the rainfall that was received, there is less than a 1 in 1,000 probability of this amount of rainfall occurring in this area of the country in a given year. So from the water rainfall totals alone, what they're saying is that's not the storm of the century. That's not even the storm of the millennia. It would take longer than a millennia for that to happen again, statistically speaking. So that's something that should sink in for a minute, just of how much rain hit this area. And in flat places, there can be storm surge and floods. The water comes up and then it comes back out a lot of times, right? And drains back in the way it came. But with this part of the country, with the mountains, those mountains, and this is a very steep, especially right on the North Carolina, Tennessee border, very, very steep mountains. I think they go from maybe around 2,000 feet elevation up to 6,000 feet very quickly. Those are very high mountains, very steep mountains. So you're coming across flat Georgia and you're hitting those mountains, and they kind of act as a baseball glove to catch those rain clouds. And it all just runs down and into the rivers. And then the upper rivers in the mountains run down to the lower rivers. And by the time you get to the French Broad River, the Swananoa River, the Nolichucky River, you had massive water surge. So this is the nature in which the water flowed in this part of the country. So these were huge rainfall totals. And going back to the size of the storm and how far out it went, the daily rainfall records were set as far west as Nashville, Tennessee, for most rain in a day in recorded history, as far north as Lexington, Kentucky, receiving record amounts of rainfall in a day. I'm assuming a 24-hour period. And then going back to western North Carolina, the ground in this area was already saturated from an unusual amount of rain leading up to the hurricane event itself. They call this a predecessor rain event, which results in saturated soil and already increased stream and river levels prior to the storm. So this is what really set the stage for unprecedented flooding. If there's enough time in between this sort of pre-flooding stage setting that goes on and the water can drain out, the hurricane may not have had anywhere near the impact that it did. And this is sort of that 1-2 punch factor that has caused high floods with Hurricane, I think it was Francis and Ivan in 2004. There were back-to-back hurricanes that caused a lot of flooding, if I'm correct. I know there were 2 hurricanes in 2004, and then with the 1916 floods, a similar situation happened where the water levels were already high, and then the storm hit. So this is where it becomes problematic for this part of the country. Those predecessor rain events. Switching gears to fatality reports, there were, and this is based off this report only. I want to set some context that missing people are not, and we're talking if someone's still missing, it's been 6 months at this point. That's not counted in this number. Okay, this is confirmed fatalities. 248 U.S. fatalities reported, confirmed. In this report as of March 19th, if that number alone makes it the deadliest storm in the U.S. since Katrina in 2005. Most of those deaths occurred in western North Carolina. Wind and fallen trees were primarily responsible for deaths in Florida and Georgia as the hurricane first struck the coast and moved inland. And South Carolina as well. By the time it got to North Carolina, freshwater flooding and landslides as a result from all the rainfall were the leading cause of death in western North Carolina, and they're still finding remains of people, sadly. And that's a separate topic, though. I'm going to just kind of stick to this report. But in North Carolina, there were an estimated, according to this report, at least 125,000 housing units damaged or destroyed, and 822,000 acres of timberland destroyed. Just in western North Carolina, there were other states that added to this total. So very wide range of destruction. Vehicles were damaged or destroyed. Trees and debris blocked roads, mudslides as well, I would add. And bridges were destroyed, leaving residents stranded without power or water for up to several weeks. And, I think back to even over the winter and some of the colder nights, unfortunately, there were people that lost their lives due to freezing. So, a lot of loss of life. And now I want to come back. I'm running out of video space on my phone. I want to come back and share some personal insights on this. So I'll probably make a second post with that. But this is the summary of this report. So I want to thank you for listening to that. And we'll follow up with you shortly with a second part to this video.